All right, so today I want to talk about the concentric circles of connection. Every time we go through any major life event, positive or negative, so this might be you getting a new job, getting married, moving away, or sometimes life crises like the pandemic, or losing a job, or experiencing a breakup, or losing loved one. It's good to check in with the nature of our current connections because sometimes we find out through life experience that our connections aren't maybe as sustainable as we might think of them to be. Some people we may not actually be as close to as we would like. And so instead of constantly putting yourself out there and then finding yourself feeling disappointed or hurt or feeling that your relationships are super imbalanced, it's good to do a check-in every now and then just to see, okay, does my connection with someone else actually match, is it able to sustain the level of intimacy as I would like? So here's a quick diagram to show that there are many different kinds of friendships. It's not a matter of yes or no, I have friends, but what kind of friends do I have? At the innermost circle are those who are ride or die people. These are the people who know ourselves the best, with whom we can share our deepest, darkest secrets, and they will for sure show up, and it's consistent. Day after day, they're going to be there for you. And then there's some folks who are, let's say, in the tier 2 level, who are people where you'd have dinners with them and you'd have good heart-to-heart talks, but when something happens, like a crisis, they may not be the immediate first people that you would call. You're still close to them, but they're not necessarily your BFFs. And then the outer tier here in tier 3 are people with whom you have mutual interests, like you like going to concerts together, you have a good time, and go wine tasting and all. But when something hard is going on in your life, they're nowhere to be found. And that doesn't mean that they're necessarily a bad friend, but they're just not in your inner circle. And it's important when we come across those kinds of connections to release them from any expectations for us to rely on them so that they don't feel super trapped about what we're going through and we don't rely on people who are not really available for us. We still have a good time, totally okay. There's a value for having those kinds of connections, but it's good to know who's who so that we are better prepared and also our relationships are actually cultivated slowly over the long run. It makes it more meaningful that there's enough room in the connection for both people. And then the further out you go in tier 4, those are your neighbors. Those can be coworkers or actual literal neighbors where you see them pretty often. You know each other's names, you know how many kids they have, you know generally what might be going on in their lives, but you're not necessarily going to call them up to hang out all the time. You might do every once in a while, but kind of see each other in passing, say a nice hello, be polite, be gentle, but other than that, they're not necessarily directly in your lives. And then there are the people who are in tier 5. These are the folks who are your acquaintances. I may have mentioned that already. I think I mentioned this part here, your acquaintances, and here's the last one, your BLs, which means your blacklisted people. These are people who have demonstrated over and over again that they are not trustworthy. They are not worth keeping in your lives. They may still be valuable as human beings, so they deserve base level of human dignity. Don't be mean to them, but necessarily don't give out your personal information. Otherwise, they might use it against you. So it's important to have these kinds of different levels, distinguishing the different kinds of connections we have so that our expectations can actually be attuned and connected with reality. We're not going to be finding ourselves kind of left hanging when we most need it. Now, on the side here, these are kind of how you may distinguish who's who. So generally going from the topmost people in the best friend or the partner category are those for whom you've cultivated a lot of connection and trust and rapport where there is a lot of good positive times of connection with them, but they're also able to sustain the difficult emotions. So it doesn't mean that you have an even amount of positive and negative interactions with each other, but this is the kind of experiences that you have personally that you can share with them. People who are in the innermost circle can actually have a lot of room to hold lots of different kinds of experiences. And as you kind of go down the list, you can see that the range of experiences that you may share with the other person kind of goes down. So at the bottommost, at tier 5, these are the acquaintances. You share like what you did over the weekend, but not necessarily that much more detail. Whereas those who are your neighbors, with whom you've built some rapport, you may feel comfortable saying, yeah, like someone kind of hit my car bumper last night and I'm kind of feeling frustrated, or yeah, like my kid is about to do a major performance and super excited about it. The tier 3 folks who are your friends are people with whom you'd invite them to have some fun connective times of, going out dancing or whatnot. And every once in a while you might share that something hard has happened, but you kind of keep it to a more surface level dynamic. These are the types of people where if you share more with them than the connection can actually sustain, these are the people who may be nowhere to be found when you're going through a hard time. Still need them around because not all experiences we have in life are super serious, and it's really good to learn how to lighten up and to enjoy things. But just know that tier 3 people are folks where you have generally positive connections, but you're not going to rely a lot of yourself on them. Those are the tier 2 and the tier 1 people. Tier 2 people are those who've demonstrated that they're trustworthy in sharing your personal pains or hardships, that they've stayed with you, they've connected with you, they've been pretty consistent. And the tier 1 folks are those who have made explicit commitments to you that they will definitely be there for you. Now, as we go through life, you may find that there's some people who kind of move back and forth between different tiers, and that's totally okay, because as we change and grow in life, our needs change as well, and so do our connections to match that accordingly. And a lot of people who reach out to me to come to therapy, they do a lot of personal work on from the inside out, and maybe half a year or a year passes by and they check in with their friendships. They go and catch up with someone that they haven't talked to in a long time, and they come to realize we don't have a lot of things in common anymore, or when I was telling them about what I was going through, it just went right over their heads. And so there's some grief and some loss that comes when doing these kinds of check-ins, but it's not that the check-ins stir up or create that pain. It's just that when you do the check-in, you catch up with what's already happened. And so doing a check-in like this gives you an opportunity to deliberately make the call as to who gets invited closer in because they've demonstrated that they're present for you, and who kind of needs to get bumped out. Now, the last one here, over here on the BL section, is the blacklist category. These are people who've deliberately, or on purpose or not, it doesn't really matter if it's intentional, they've deliberately taken up way too much space in the relationship. You don't have permission to have your own feelings or your experiences. When you try to speak up, you get shut down, or you get dismissed, minimized, gaslit, whatever. These are the people who are kind of in the toxic category, where it's generally good to give them as minimal information as possible. Sometimes these people are those who used to be your closest friends. Sometimes they're family members, and it's really, really hard and painful in those situations. But the cost for not putting up those boundaries is that you get more and more diminished. And emotions like resentment, guilt, shame, anxiety, those are all pieces of evidence that someone who ought to be either in the outer tiers or in the blacklist category have moved up into the inner circle more than they're supposed to. Sometimes they barge in, sometimes you may have let them overstay their welcome. So here are the concentric circles of connection. Hope this has been helpful, and I'll talk to you next time.